So this is really fun session. It's a panel session, deployment and commercialization, and we are very honored to have Dean Zabiozec as a chairman of the ITS Australia. He's going to chair this panel. And good luck to Dean, because it's a bunch of different speakers from the industry, all with very strong background in transportation and intelligent transport. So a little bit about Dean. Dean was appointed to the president of position of CEO of HMI Technology in Australia in March 2015. Dean is a board member and president of Intelligent Transport System Australia, a board member and current chair of ITS Asia Pacific, the Australian head of delegation and former convener of Working Group 9 on the International Standard Organization Technical Committee, ISO TC 204 for the Intelligent Transport System. And he was telling us last night during a dinner how difficult is this standard organization to work through from different countries. So fantastic experience in there. And previously, Dean worked with VicRoad, the State Road Authority of Victoria, from 1984 to 2015, and myself personally got lots of support from Dean when I was working in Monash University, going to him all the time asking for money, and he always told, always come up with something. Gave me some money. So probably got to Gary. So lots of secret here, Gary. And Dean hold a Bachelor of Engineering in Civil from Melbourne University. So I would like to welcome Dean to chair this panel. Thank you, Dean.
Thanks, Majid, for wishing me luck. Hopefully it all goes well. Thank you, everybody, for having me here as moderator for this session. And firstly, I'd just like to apologise for not being here bright and early this morning. I was saying to Gary and a few others, we've all been on the run all week long with dinners here and there and summits all over the place. Needed to go to work for a couple of hours to do some real work. But I'm pleased to be here, and on behalf of ITS Australia, I know probably Susan earlier today when she was speaking, we're pleased to be part both of the AIMS trial with Majid and Gary and others, and certainly very happy to be part of the Michigan Australia Exchange, or the Michigan Australia MOU, depending on which way you want to describe it. I don't know whether anyone's mentioned it's MAX, Michigan Australia Exchange. Many of you have been at the summit this week, some haven't, but hopefully you've enjoyed a good week that ITS Australia has put on with regard to functions. And again, I'd like to thank the people from Michigan for coming over and making it a special event this year. Just a little bit about OMIO and HMI, where I come from, that pertains to what we're talking about today and throughout the day. My company traditionally manufactures a lot of the electronic signs that you see on all the freeways here in Melbourne, the lane use management signs, the colour and monochrome variable message signs. So deeply indebted to the likes of Transurban and Vic Roads and City and Eastlink for being really good customers of mine. But that's our traditional business. Our newer business right now, which is where I was heading to, is that we have developed and designed and manufactured our own AV shuttle. We're an Australian and New Zealand company, and over the last 18 months we've been spending a lot of time and effort developing our own brand of shuttle. So we hope to be competing with the Navias and the Easy Miles, and maybe not the Zoes, but certainly in the shuttle market against the French. We thought that there was a space for a locally made vehicle, and that's why we stepped into it. So that's enough about me. With respect to today's panel session, as Majid said, we've got a number of industry speakers, and I'll introduce them shortly. The intent is that each of them will give us a 3 to 5 minute little snapshot about what they do, why they're here, all that sort of thing. And then we're going to spend probably 3/4 of an hour, maybe 50 minutes as a panel, having a discussion. But I'm always intrigued when you have these panel sessions. It's almost like you're putting on a little show up the front. It's like somebody's sitting, a whole bunch of people there watching television and watching 5 other people having a conversation. Well, that's okay, but I'd like to get some interaction with the people who've paid their money to be here. So whilst we've got a lot of nice and interesting questions that we'll throw at each other and we'll give each other some really good answers, it'd be nice if you all thought of some really nice questions to throw at the panel. Okay? So without any further ado, I'll introduce the speakers, and in this order: Chris Bax from Cubic Transportation Systems, David Bolt, CAPS Trafficcom Australia, Scott Benjamin from WSP, our friend Susan Proctor from Michigan Economic Development Corporation, and I just don't think that Russell Brett from IAG is here yet. He did mention to me early this morning that he may not be able to make it, and I don't actually see him here, so that may be a minor problem. But first of all, I'd like to introduce Chris. Come up, say a few words, Chris.
Right side. Okay, the good news, I don't have a presentation, I just want to have one slide. So just a little bit about me. You'll probably quickly tell from the accent and the fact I say data or data in an interchangeable kind of way. I'm a UK guy. I also spent a bit of time in Southern California before moving to Australia about 2 years ago, and as I said, been at the summit for a couple of days talking to you all, and I said that I kind of moved to Australia because I was very excited about what was going on in Australia. I saw a real appetite and a vision that really aligned with what we're trying to do in Cubic. So I'm responsible for our ITS strategy globally and the delivery of those things in Australia. So the reason I put up one slide was really because we've been talking about Cubic and presenting about Cubic for the last 2 days, and you probably don't want to hear that again. But also I think it was kind of a slide we put together to kind of describe what Cubic does. And again, I'm not going to go through a lot of that, but I think the other thing it kind of highlights is it's really complex out there, and the reason why we haven't just built one single platform that does all the things you need is because you kind of can't. And we're not actually good at all the things we need to be good at doing. We're really good at some things, and we're not so good at others, and we want to focus on the things that we're really good at, and we want to collaborate with others to solve some of the challenges that are ahead. So that's why we're a part of the iMove CRC. We're doing a lot of work, and Majid kindly talked about us with the work we're doing with the University of Melbourne, and as he said, a founding partner in AIMS. And those things that we're doing are really around collaborating, whether it be with large organisations like Cubic or whether it be with startups, etc. So one of the reasons why that slide is so complicated, and I don't want to say confusing because we've put a lot of effort into trying to make it unconfusing, but it still looks like there's lots of arrows and boxes. One of the reasons why it's a bit complicated is because we work across the world. So we work in Australia, we work in the US, and in Western Europe, and things are different in those locations. The actual layout of the cities and the countries are different, the standards are different, the whole thing is quite dynamic. But we came from a history of being a public transport company, and I don't think we're being recorded, my boss isn't here, but also we were a pretty uncollaborative company actually. 5 or 10 years ago we kind of thought we knew everything and we did public transport. But we quickly realised that if you're good at one thing, then that might be okay, but this is going to be a very complex integrated solution over the next 1, 2, 5, 10, 20, whoever knows how many years. So we actually looked at, okay, where did we want to focus, what did we want to do? And we built out a number of tools and made some acquisitions around, I guess, as I said at the summit, really about building an integrated transport network. How do we go about that? Because I think that's, for us, is key. We came up with this brand, which we called Next City. We launched it at the World Congress in, I think it was Vienna in 2012 or something, so it's kind of 7, 8 years old, and everyone kind of talks to me about what's your Next City platform. It's not a platform. I said we can't do everything. It's really a vision, and we kind of use it as a guiding light about where did we want to go, what journey did we want to go on, and then we changed that journey as we went along. And I think we kind of got it right. We've obviously had to tweak it a little bit, but we got it right because I think people are talking about mobility as a service now, and that's kind of, with a bit of blurring of the edges, the kind of thing we thought about Next City might be when we kind of created that vision 7 years ago. And of course, we couldn't have come up with anything as clever as mobility as a service then. We only had Next City, but really around one account, so a single account for payment information, etc., around integrating things like journey planning, and then helping organisations, customers and people run operations, use data and analytics to actually to deliver some outcomes. So reduce complexity, detect, integrate, analyse, optimise, all of those things. We're responsible for the public transport ticketing system in Sydney, the Opal Card, Godcard in Brisbane, as well as a number of big cities in the US, New York, Chicago, and London in Europe. We've made some acquisitions around traffic signals, so we acquired a company called Trafficware, a US traffic signal company. We realised that the traffic signal intersection, that optimisation was going to be pretty critical. We also saw the detection was going to be really critical, so we acquired a company called GridSmart, which does a sort of niche 360-degree camera to really improve the data and the information. Going forward, we've invested in mobile ticketing. I think mobile is absolutely critical for those kind of things, and of course, analytics, and we're trying to bring some of those things together in the projects that we do around the world, such as Susan mentioned, the Integrated Intelligent Congestion Management Program in Sydney. So look, I'll stop there. I think it's a complicated world. I'm looking forward to the debate about how we go solve it.
Okay, thanks, Chris. I'm told you've got to sit in that very first stool there, and as the other speakers come along, they'll accompany you there and make you feel not so lonely. The next speaker is David Bolt from CAPS Trafficcom Australia. And David's been very busy this week, filling in for Soren most of the week and speaking on his behalf. So, David, please join us.
Good afternoon, everybody. Yes, I have certainly been busy this week. Talking and eating is what this week's been about. But the lunches, and not drinking. I have a photo. Oh, you have a photo? We'll be deleting that and it's not going to come up. But no, seriously, I think this has just been a fantastic week. I think kudos to ITS Australia also what they've put on this summit. I had the pleasure yesterday to sit on a panel, including with Susan Proctor, talk about future skills and diversity, something that's quite close to my heart. And I'm glad to hear it being talked about today as well. This forum is about technology, this forum is about policy regulation as well. But diversity is so critical to bringing a different perspective to our industry. And with that perspective comes ideas. And we're at CAPS here in Australia, we've got 84 people and we have 39 nationalities in our company just here in Australia. So it's such an important part of that. So very proud to be talking about that yesterday. You'll be glad I've got a presentation, but I've tried to make it fun because it is Friday and it is after lunch. So there'll be a feedback form if you think it is fun at the end. But what do I do? So I'm head of our solution consulting business, and I have the unenvious task of talking everything from electronic toll collection to urban mobility to V2X technology that we've got deployed up at TMR that Miranda spoke about, all the way through to traffic management systems that we manage NZTA's network in New Zealand for the last 8 years. So I've got a pretty interesting job of what I wake up every morning and go, what am I going to talk about today? But I love it. I absolutely love it. So what I'm going to talk about here is just what does utopia look like? And maybe I'm going to put up a bit of sound bites maybe you can take into the panel to ask myself and Chris. Don't worry, we get on pretty well. So, but I look forward to a bit of a debate. So I thought I'd start around citizens, first of all. The expectations of our citizens are evolving. And what I mean by that is they're looking for how we can provide them insights into how to use data or data and how to move around safer and more efficiently. So I spoke about yesterday how my 62-year-old mother to get to my house. They've just moved to Melbourne, and she took 3 modes of transport in order to get to my house. She took a full multimodal journey involving a train, a bike, and a tram, and she's only been in Melbourne for less than 3 months. I fell off my seat, understanding that there's my mother using a multimodal form of transport. My father definitely doesn't do that. So it was great to see that, and we have to recognize that everyone's a little bit different, but our citizens are truly evolving, and all of us, in terms of how we want to move around, and we have to think about that going forward. So how does the environment that our citizens are playing in react to that? Well, there's a lot of challenges out there, but I'm a glass half full type of guy, so there's an awful lot of opportunities. But there's a lot of challenges in terms of how we collect data. We're in this silo nature of thinking of each mode of transport differently. We're not sharing that data. We start to think about IP first rather than leave it at the door and collaborate. I'd probably like to challenge the market that we're in about ITS. Maybe, Dean, you need to change the sign, because in my opinion, it should say integrated transport solutions, not maybe intelligent. And I mean integrated because it all requires all of us to come together, public, private sector, industry, citizens, everybody together in order to change this, because we are thinking in silos. So we've got a lot of challenges ahead in terms of where we're going, but let's see how technology can perhaps solve some of that. So I'm going to talk about dystopia. So I've selected this image. This is from a movie that came out in the early 20th century. I'm told if you squint, you can see Sir Ian Oxworth somewhere in this picture. I'm not sure, Ian, but maybe we can see you. So part of this image, this is from a movie called Metropolis. And what I love about this image, in the early 20th century, this is a full multimodal picture. If you look closely, you see there's cars, there's trains, there's an elevated walkway, there's elevated subway in there. They've got an airplane, a prop plane, a modern day drone, perhaps. Any idea when this movie came out? Hey, Ian?
I think it was around about 1927.
1927. So this was 92 years ago that this movie presented this dystopian society. I'm not advocating for a dystopia. Oh, right.
You saw it when it first came out.
Yeah. Glad to hear that, Ian, and clarify that. We're trying to get an idea of your age now. So, but I thought this was incredible that even back then, over 90 years ago, there was a multimodal dystopia shown. Where are we today? What does our ecosystem look like today? Well, probably looks a little bit like this. This isn't Punt Road. Any idea where we think this is? So we've got India? No. Manila. Chris has seen this before. This is Manila. So look at the congestion into this. Somehow it moves around. I've been to Manila a few times with Caption. It's incredible trying to solve their problem. They came to us to say, how do we do it? There's a few more things in technology. But how do we solve this with technology? Hard one. It starts with a lot more other features. Social, economic, political, challenge the status quo a little bit. Technology, in my opinion, can't solve this. It requires a bit of change management. So we've got a little bit way to go. And just closing on that, so where does our ecosystem look today? This is a depiction of of how we're all getting around. You can see there's the operator, and in front of the operator are all their different modes of transport, all those silos of train, buses, trams, and they're all having to orientate it together. They're not integrated. So what we could do, and I call it today plus one, because I don't call it future. I call it today plus one tomorrow, because this technology is already here. And from our perspective at Capsh, and what also Chris talked about, was how to fuse all this together. The infrastructure, all the stakeholders, and it all underpins data. Well, that's a really important part. So that's certainly what we at Capsh are going there. And I thought I'd leave you on one last slide. I'm a bit of a chef at home. I don't say to be a good chef, but I like making some recipes. And I was thinking about today going, what are some recipes for success in terms of our ecosystem? So I thought I'd write down a recipe of what I think we should do. So note, you require a good chef, and some really good ingredients into making this. So in my book, you need a good, healthy scoop of policy framework and regulation there in order to drive that shift. You need 2 cups of an open data platform. We talked about it today earlier, but somewhere to start a homologated platform in order to do that. 4 good lumps of innovation, diversity, that I spoke about earlier, to put that in of mobility providers and technology. Then you want to divide that mixture and layer it up in order for every type of citizen, whether it's my 62-year-old mother or my father or a millennial, to use. Give it a good stir and see how we can load balance that system. Carefully measure that so that we find those change levers that can exist to improve the network. Bake it at low temperature, and when you start to do that, you start to make something. It starts to grow, and at that point, you start to generate some insights from that data. And then last of all, let it cool, serve it to your customers, serve it to your citizens, with a good dollop of leadership in there and a little bit of luck, and you might actually get something. So I like to call this the capture cake of how we put it together. So there you go. And remember, change is a process, it's not an event. So, but let's all start collaborating in order to get that cake to hopefully work. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, our next speaker is Scott Benjamin from WSP. I've known Scott for a long, long time, always been involved in either AITPM or ITS, well connected in the industry. Scott, if you'd like to come up.
Thanks, Dean, and thanks, David. It was upbeat, it was some inspiration. I'm going to take us down the hill a bit. I want to, sorry to do this so soon after lunch, but I want to ask the question, are we certain, or are you certain? What I want to do is actually come back to, there's been a few discussions about films over the last few days, and I want to talk about a film branded as The Road Warrior in the US. We knew it as Mad Max, and I don't want to see a Mad Max out of this inspirational group of people that are here today and collected today. And we did a study a few years ago, and something we referred to internally as the epic struggle, and you've probably seen similar slides, but this is an ownership model of automated, connected vehicles, startups, mobility as a service, all sorts of sort of platforms and new things spinning off there. And that's the ownership model. And I often ask people, what does that look like? So it's a mess. It looks like chaos. And we want to bring some order to that chaos. We want to understand that for ourselves in the room, for industry, and for the very least, our customers and the community and the people outside. So we began on this journey, and actually what's interesting about that last slide, it wasn't done for a car company, it wasn't done for a government agency, it was done for a public transport operator, because they believed, this was Metrolinx, Greater Toronto public transport operator, they believed that their business model and their public transport usage was under threat, and this was over 3 years ago. So we did a lot of scenario development work with them and helped them work through those issues and help them figure out what really matters and what they can do and the role they play in this bigger ecosystem. I'll talk about another project we did here in Victoria. Julian Ma, who's way up the back there hiding, thanks Julian, did a great piece of work here with Infrastructure Victoria. This is the ICT needs for automated vehicles in the future, and so we can do great things with scenario development. And in this case, we're looking forward 30 years, and you can imagine a world in 30 years that we've installed all of this infrastructure, and this is particularly about telecommunications infrastructure on our road network, and it's going to bring about great improvements in terms of reduction in harm and reduction in crashes in rural environments. We can also draw a picture of how we see an architecture and approach to systems that would make that work. And it's a straw man, and we absolutely accept that. And we put that up to be challenged and a discussion and to move forward. And those sorts of efforts are really important. We don't get that, we certainly don't get that future perfect. It's for discussion. So moving on to stage 2 in the process, we wanted to understand the system. And this is where I come back to a bit of a downer. I don't know if anyone has seen this book, but it's obviously very old because it's yellow. And Ian will definitely know this, and and sorry to pick on you today, Ian. I don't know if David warned you about this, and I've just followed on, but I was almost born. This is 1971, and it's a really interesting tale. So this is the limits to growth. There's the RAND Corporation, MIT, some really big brains got involved in this, and it's a really fascinating story. I'd encourage you to have a look. But it looked at scenarios of the future, particularly global food, resources, energy, really big picture things. And 2 out of the 3 scenarios were all dead pretty soon. And look, the feedback was really interesting. They said garbage in, garbage out. There's a big model behind that. Anyone dealing with models knows that one. This is my favourite, Chicken Little with a computer. I don't know if if people, young kids, Foxy Loxy, the sky is falling. But the authors noted that this is only based on what we say is the indications of the system's behavioural tendencies. And what they're trying to say, it's more about the vibe. Don't get too hung up on hard numbers and the hard answers. This is really about the interactions. It's a conversation, and it's probably worth coming back to and thinking about again. These things run in cycles, so 1971, it'll do a few more cycles. But I wanted to talk about it and my journey here this morning. Very sleepy this morning, 3 cups of coffee. I'm feeling more and more sleepy through the day. I'm probably not going to get to bed so early tonight. And the next morning it's going to be worse. And this is a nice system dynamics model. You're probably using things like this today, and it's good to reference where this comes from. Reinforcing model, it gets worse and worse. There's a balancing model where my friends at work, Julian up the back, tells me, you're really grumpy, why don't you cut it out, stop behaving like that, drink less coffee. I get similar advice at home. So what we did is moving forward in that chaos that we looked at the beginning, we wanted to bring this together to a combined view, and we started with 4 models: connected, automated, shared and electric. We've shrunk that to 3. We cannot separate connected and automated. That's very clear. And now we need to move forward with that to deployment. And I think this is the point we'll get on here and discuss in a minute. It's about commercialisation. So we trial, we understand, we improve, we deploy. And I think the speed and agility in that process that is offered through test beds and environments like AIMS is really critical, and we look forward to chatting more about that in a minute. Thanks.
All right, thanks, Scott. And it's really unfair to you today, and I think 2 out of the 3 speakers so far have had a go at you. Hopefully the last one doesn't. Susan, Michigan Economic Development Corporation, Susan Proctor, if you could give us some of your thoughts, please.
All right, indeed it is Friday, and if anybody's feeling old and yellow, it is me at this point in time. Thanks again for everybody for coming. Once again, I'm Susan Proctor, Strategic Initiatives Director at Michigan Economic Development Corporation. And today, I principally wanted to talk about a few deployments that we have in Michigan. One of them in particular I wanted to highlight because it was on one of David's slides yesterday is Dirk. I want to point out that it's also a Detroit company now. It's one of the companies that we were able to attract through our Planet M grant program. And they're using thermal and radar sensors to provide data feeds. It's an AI solution to predict pedestrian behavior, and it's being used in one of the busiest Detroit intersections. And you can see them. That's actually a picture of them putting the equipment in there. I also wanted to mention a project called Propel Me. The reason why I want to bring this one up, I want to say we've through the Planet M program, we've supported 46 deployments and technology activations. I want to point out Propel Me, that's one of the latest ones, because it was directly a result of the activities through our MOU that project came to Michigan. So I just, we signed an MOU with the UK a little earlier than Australia in April of 2018. And Propel Me has just come to Michigan, created an office there, and they have a unique solution so they don't have to do all the 3D mapping, so they can have an arrive and drive situation that they're going to be able to deploy in Michigan. But really what I want to talk about today is a really customer-focused, customer-centric project that's being launched in the city of Detroit. I keep talking about customer focus. It's called Project Kinetic. And it actually, the outcome of this was 5 additional pilots to address certain challenges within the city of Detroit. So what happened is the city came to Planet M, to MEDC, and said, you know, we have a number of these issues that we know we have, some pain points within our community, and we need your help to solve them. And so we looked at Boston Consulting Group has this methodology for going through a fast innovation process to look at innovation. And we thought maybe we could use that methodology and apply it to Detroit's pain points. So representatives from each of the organizations on the screen worked hand in hand for a 12-week period early in 2018, and they brainstormed more than 120 innovative solutions to tackle the most pressing mobility challenges in Detroit. And you know, this innovation sprint involved interviewing more than 100 citizens of Detroit, and also those individuals that come in and out of Detroit either for tourism or those crossing the bridge from Canada, and really ask them what those pain points were. The citizens were very, very central to this opportunity. So the group worked together in this framework, and they identified 4 top areas of friction affecting residents and businesses and visitors to Detroit. And those 4 challenges that they identified were, number 1, neighborhood mobility. I don't know if anybody's ever been to Detroit. It's really awesome. The city center is very dense at about 98% residential occupancy rate at this point in time. But the downsizing of the city during the economic downturn has left some of our neighborhoods kind of out in the hinterlands. You look at I think a population of Detroit at its peak was about 1.7 million people, and now it's at about 800,000. And a lot of that density is downtown, but there's all these other neighborhoods where lower income individuals live that are rather underserved. So we wanted to look at a neighborhood mobility approach to improve the mobility for those citizens who live in those lower density neighborhoods. The second challenge we wanted to take on was downtown accessibility. Again, very dense downtown. The major employer here that backed that was Bedrock and Quicken Loans. Bedrock is one of the largest real estate firms in the Midwest. It's headed up by a man named Dan Gilbert. You might know him. He's the owner of the Cleveland Cavaliers. But he has invested in about 114, I've lost count, properties in Detroit. He's renovating them, filling them with employees, and his own employees from his mortgage company as well. So he needed a solution to get his individuals from a parking structure or parking areas around Detroit to get them to work and get them out in the community for lunch. I think Jim mentioned this one earlier. The third challenge that Project Kinetic needed to address was traffic safety. So building that infrastructure that reduces the number of traffic fatalities, that's obvious that we all need that. The other one we wanted to put into place was an electric vehicle utilization and education project. You know, a lot of people in Detroit, we drive a lot. There's a lot of range anxiety in terms of charging and charging stations. So we wanted to create an opportunity, an educational opportunity in downtown Detroit for everybody to take advantage of. So as we looked at all of those problems, we chose out of those 120 submissions for pilots, we looked at some of the criteria were desirability. Does the concept solve a clear, compelling mobility friction for Detroit residents and employees? We looked at viability. Could the concept sustain itself over the long term? And feasibility. Is the concept achievable with today's technological capabilities? And can it be implemented in 12 months? So the 5 submissions that were approved to move forward were, I need a drum roll. No, first of all, Charge D. Charge D is actually a pilot right now. Our energy company, DTE, partnered with the city. Basically, it's a cool spot to charge your vehicle, and it's an opportunity to sort of catch up and have a social opportunity around a charging station. And it's in one of the central areas of downtown Detroit, and it's actually been really, really popular. It's kind of, a lot of people go there to like hang out, even though they're not charging their vehicle. It's kind of fun. And there's Car for You. This one is probably my favorite. This is the one that serves the neighborhood mobility issue. And so it's a car sharing program for low-income individuals. And it's addressing that neighborhood need for transit and car sharing for underserved individuals. The third one is microtransit. It dynamically routes, it shuttles commuters to reduce travel time, it finds more direct routes, and reduces the number of stops at certain times. The city of Detroit was the lead on that one. We unloaded that parking is an issue. We wanted to make it easier for folks to park downtown by offering incentives for parking situations, lower prices, sort of a surge, non-surge price for parking. And that one was sponsored by Quicken Loans and Bedrock Detroit. And then the 5th one was Busority. So they're providing connected technology. Just the word Busority, it prioritizes buses at certain times in the city during the high traffic. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about those, kind of present that. I've been the one that's been harping on the fact that we need to find solutions that the citizens can use and also connect with over time. And I'm really proud that this project is underway. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you all for quick comments. Took a little bit longer than we thought we might, so we may not have 50 minutes to have questions. So hopefully you've all got a lot of burning questions that you'd like to ask before we go into it. Now, I'll give you an opportunity now. Is there anyone who wants to put their hand up and say, hey, Susan, I've got a question for you, or hey, Chris, I've got a question for you? No, that's surprising. All right, well, we'll whip into it then, and if there are any questions as we move along, please interject. So as I walk over there, this is for all of you. You can all jump in and answer. Last night we had a thought leadership dinner, a bunch of gold and platinum members of ITS Australia. We were going to meet with the Deputy Prime Minister, but unfortunately the death of Tim Fisher last week meant that he couldn't make it. So we had a conversation, and one of the items was collaboration. It was a key topic. So what I'd like to know is from all of you, how do you see collaboration and partnerships playing a part in deployment and commercialisation of ITS, in particular AVs, connected vehicles? Over to anyone who wants to start.
Essential. You got one.
I think a great question, first of all. I think you, like I said in my presentation of changing the acronym of this industry to integrated transport solutions, what we live in. I think what probably the rhetoric coming across from both myself and I speak maybe on behalf of Chris, but it all has to happen together. We need to create that connected mobility platform, let's say. One of the ingredients taken from my cake recipe is around data. And how we push and bring that through, and it has to happen with public and private sector to leave that IP at the door. I think where we've seen success from our perspective of smart cities, I'll give an analogy of what we did in Buenos Aires of bringing them together, was just these 4 municipalities working together in terms of pushing that data out onto a homologated platform, leaving the IP at the door, and then taking that in order to actually create that situational awareness of their network. So that came from a huge amount of stakeholders, from government, from industry bodies. There was a university involved. There was 7 different VMS manufacturers even. Everyone came to the table, signed an MOU. This is how we're going to create the business rules, and this is what's going to happen because it's a full ecosystem. So that can only come together when you actually have a real fusion of those types of people in the room, and then technology can help. But without that, it doesn't matter how good your technology is.
Okay. Any other comments?
So I kind of speak a couple of real-world examples of collaboration. I mean, from a cubic perspective, it's really to help us where we don't have skills necessarily. A lot of the reasons that we're working with the University of Melbourne is because there are a lot of smart people, and do you need to go out and hire a load of smart people? And so why not use a university? So over the last couple of years, we've developed a great relationship, and I think it's been a good relationship in both directions. So I think that's an important part of collaboration. It's not about what can I get from somebody else, it's what can you give. Which is probably the second example where I think like iMove help, where you bring in a number of partners together. And we're participating in a project with Coda Wireless, where it's really a Coda Wireless project, but we kind of see that, hey, if Coda Wireless can do this kind of stuff, it kind of might be good for us. So, sometimes there may not be a business case for one organisation just to do stuff, but if we kind of both look at our own benefits of what we could do, maybe not necessarily together, but if things happened, it might mutually benefit both parties. So, and collaboration is all about events like this, relationships.
Scott or Susan, do you want to add anything?
Two minor things. The benefit of collaborating when it comes to infrastructure. Anytime we're going to go and put anything on street, working together and thinking about that common backbone and things that we can do together. Even if you're not sharing data initially, this is a key point we can collaborate on. And secondly, any interaction with the public. So if we're working with local governments, they don't want to hear the same or similar ideas 5 times over from 5 different organisations. Let's figure out how to work on that together and actually get a more meaningful business model potentially by that collaboration.
Okay. Well, let me move on to another question. Susan, you can jump in any time. What do you see as being the key enablers to success when it comes to implementing leading edge technology? I mean, obviously, collaboration is the starting point, but what are the enablers to achieve success?
I think awareness and challenging that. What are the barriers to adoption of technology? I'll give an example. For example, when elevators were first established in the 1950s, inside the elevator sat there was an elevator operator. Now the reason and what they did, their function was to press the buttons. You didn't need a trained person in the lift in order to press the buttons. The reason that person was there was that to humanize that interaction, because this was a brand new bit of technology. So beforehand, people weren't adopting those elevators in these new skyscrapers on Madison Avenue in New York because they took the stairs because they didn't like it and they heard some bad press about them causing injuries, and they did. But by putting a human there, suddenly there was an interface. So it's how we humanize that new connection with technology and how we grab that awareness out there and educate. And I think what we're doing, what Majid's doing in Ames, for example, and the rest of his team is a great step. We need other of those key enablers just to educate the market, make them aware. I'm not saying put a human at every intersection, but we just need to humanize the interface between it.
Yeah, there's a great example actually of that human interface, because when M-City launched the shuttle on the North Campus, they have a safety conductor inside of that vehicle at all times, and that's a key, that's a key person. It's an educational element for the individuals riding on the shuttle, but it's also, a surety that somebody is there and somebody can take control if needed. So yeah, I would agree. And so there's actually a case study that's pretty good that's out there. Jim Sayer can probably tell you exactly where it is on the website, but it's a great case study, and safety conductors were a big part of that study.
It's an interesting synergy, isn't it? That, elevators that have been around forever, but at one stage they started. Very similar to where we find ourselves now with these autonomous shuttles, where there's no steering wheel, no pedals, but in order to get them deployed, we need to have somebody in them to take control of them if necessary. And that leads me to a question that came from a presentation that I think Kirk Stoodle did in the last couple of days. He said we can articulate the benefits to safety from this point of view of various ITS systems, but there are other benefits like congestion management and so forth. But how do we cast a broad enough net to get the interest from the community, which is the customers, the people who are actually going to use these systems, so that we can get the deployment happening, because we haven't really excited people enough. There's not enough demand in order for us to implement. Any thoughts?
Sorry, is that one? Yeah, that one's working. Good. I'm going to pick on someone else in the audience now. It's Miranda. So we were chatting about this topic yesterday, and we need to focus on safety, and we all understand why. This is absolutely critical, there's no doubt. But what if you had a Godcard? So I have this thing that travels with me, this special box that I can attach to my dash, and it does special things for me. It could give me a green light when I need it. Late at night and I'm rolling up to a vehicle actuated set of signals, it's going to give me a green light through. What else can it do for me? It can tell me when there's roadworks ahead. It can tell me when I'm going to be significantly delayed. And these are things that matter to me because the safety features, they're for everyone else on the road. I don't need that. I've never had an accident. That's everyone else's problem. I think if you can find something like that, and I love that concept. I don't know about the branding, and but it's something like that can have impact and meaning to an individual. It's a different way of looking at things.
Have you talked to my husband? He has the same dream.
I guess I would, similar kind of answer, I guess. It's, I think we've got to be careful we don't focus on technology and processes and standards and policies and regulations. It's all got its place, but that example Scott gives, it's the customer experience, isn't it? That's kind of why we're here for society, we're here for mobility. I think the projects that do well, and if we get our business cases right, they should be really focused on the outcomes that we're delivering. So, focusing the right, it's not about how, in fact, I don't think we want to put a lot of technology out there, because I think maintenance is a big issue. The less technology, the better, actually. But if we can deliver those customer experiences, and I think that's, somebody mentioned earlier, things about education as well, in terms of, if you walked out on the street and said, hey, I've been at an ITS conference all week, and I think most people would go, huh? What's that? So, I don't know. You talked about changing it integrated. I don't know whether we need to think about changing it even further and stuff, and talking in the language of the customer.
Yeah. Any thoughts from anyone? Yeah, Majid.
One question, a little bit changing the pace. We talked about deployment and commercialization. I know Cubic and Chaps both very international company. You have lots of R&D happening in US and Europe. I was wondering, what are the barriers here? I know that we're working hard together to make sure that you get more happening in Australia. But what are the barriers here? To get more and more. For example, compared with Michigan, I envy that. I wish I was there. To take Melbourne University in the middle of Michigan, I probably do a little bit better. But here in this country, most of the companies selling products or providing service. What can we do to change that attitude? From your perspective, because you're moving to different places, you see what is happening. I mean, I don't think just the population is a problem here, because we have a gateway to the Asia Pacific. This country has urbanization that is maybe 20 years, 30 years ahead of US or Europe. So what are the maybe a couple of things that we can do differently to make sure we get more R&D and deployment and commercialization happening in this country?
Bring back the automotive OEMs to Australia? I think you look at Michigan, you look at the massive automotive OEMs that are there, back in Germany as well, what they're doing, that's a huge influence, because that's one mode of transport. But that aside, I think it's one of my opinions. I haven't got time to go through all of them. Don't be afraid that it doesn't work. I spoke about this with Daniel Hoyne at the interval. I'm not swearing when I say this because it's a Startup Victoria initiative, but they run something called Fucked Up Nights Melbourne. And it's great. They run it every 2 months. And it's amazing what the state have done because they bring people in to talk about how something hasn't worked and having that humility of bringing the lessons learned. And I would love maybe to see maybe a different way to say it, Dean, to get it across, but something like that for our industry of let's all learn what didn't work, let's be humble about it, let's learn about it, because I feel here perhaps we're so focused on it has to work, especially from a government perspective, of course, taxpayers' money, but we need to be humble of learning what didn't, and maybe we should start something there in a similar type of campaign to share globally what didn't work and learn from it. That's true collaboration.
Sure. Any other questions? Yeah, Ian, get one back at them now.
Basically, what I'm interested in terms of the acceptance of autonomous vehicles. So we run a survey every year. We've been increasing the number of questions and putting out information on autonomous vehicles and the acceptance. They like it in terms of safety, entertainment value. As soon as we raise the questions of would you go in the vehicle without any controls, basically interest drops straight away. We also found that the level of acceptance in people learning how to use the functions on their current level 2, level 3 vehicles is pretty abysmal when there's less than 20%. And so a lot of the people out there with autonomous or semi-autonomous functions on their vehicles do not use them. And so the impact on the safety side won't be accumulated out. It's just similar to what's in the US or certainly is in parts of Europe.
Well, I think it's kind of a big jump to autonomous, right? And so it's that ADAS, those ADAS systems that we have now. But I can tell you, there's been a couple times that I have turned off my park assist, right? Because it's bothersome, right, or something. So yeah, I mean, I think that we have similar acceptance issues. But like my friend Sarah, who's here with me, just bought a vehicle and she's got lane departure help on her vehicle, and she absolutely loves it. So I don't know if it could be a generational thing or what, but I do think we all have similar situations.
Well, in the survey, we do cover a very broad range.
Okay.
100,000 odd people, and we do break it down by age range and demographic. And certainly, in certain age range, I won't say it would be about my age. It does vary.
I know we have some people. I know Michael Case was around, and gentlemen here from FCAI. And I know that's a question that bounces around, but I don't know if anyone else wants to comment on that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Another question. Here we go.
Just a quick comment on that as well. I'm from the U.S. and from New Hampshire specifically, and I know a lot of people in New Hampshire who would buy a car without seatbelts if it was an option.
Yeah.
They don't wear them. They prefer not to wear them, and they would absolutely buy a car without them. So there's going to be that mindset worldwide in lots of different cultural ecosystems. I think there's two kind of methodologies or mindsets to combat that, which is A, setting examples, creating ecosystems where people could optionally participate in an only autonomous vehicle area and have that as an example that people could see. And then there is a place for regulation as well, and I don't have an answer for that. But I think one of the things that gets lost sometimes in the conversations is my friends and family back in New Hampshire who are going to resist this as much as they can just for the sake of it. And that's just something that we all need to keep in mind.
All right. Thank you for the comment.
In New Hampshire is the only state, I think, where seatbelts are not compulsory in the front seat, right?
I hope so.
Yeah, I hope so. Because I kind of tie those two questions together. I kind of personally, I kind of look at level 5 automation. If I was to do the survey, 52-year-old guy who doesn't have a car anymore because he lives in a city where public transport, I can kind of get by. I don't think I'll ever drive an autonomous vehicle, so the kind of autonomy that people are talking about, because I just don't think they'll be around in my lifetime. But then I also hear, 40-odd thousand people killed in the US, 1,500, 2,000 in Australia. But then I see seatbelts are not mandated by policy, regulation, whatever you call it. I find that kind of scary that on one side we can say, hey, 40,000 people, we've got to do something about it, autonomous vehicles of the future. But yet we don't, as a regulation, say seatbelts are mandatory. I mean, they were brought in the UK, I know I was a kid, I think like 70s or 80s, I'm not actually sure, but and of course my dad didn't wear a seatbelt because he'd been used to not, but quickly people got it, and it's a natural reaction to put a seatbelt on. And the fact, I'd actually be scared to get in a car and not put my seatbelt on and feel really weird. So, I think we've got to be more proactive. And you talk about enabling, there is a role for government to actually get stuff done. So
Thanks, Chris. Look, the organisers are giving me the wind-up. The organisers being Majid. As you can see, the time slips by very quickly in little sessions like this. One of the last questions I was going to ask the panel is, next year is the Olympic Games in Japan, so it's a bit unfair to say what would you do by then, but let's say you were preparing now for the next Mobility Olympics, which would be in 4 years' time. What would be the one key project you'd like to implement in your country or your state or your city? I'm not going to ask them to answer that because we haven't got enough time, but perhaps this afternoon when there's another break or at some other opportune time, you can tease that out, have that discussion. Thanks for the interaction. It's always better when the crowd does interact, and again, thank you all and thank the panel for their time. Well done, everyone. Good man.
All right, thanks so much, Dean. Thank you for the panel. Thanks to all the panellists. So here we are late Friday afternoon, and we're going to give you a chance to have some tabletop conversations in a moment. And then, fortunately, we're not going to go 1 second over 4 o'clock, and there'll be some drinks served, so well deserved, I might add. So we need Jim Sayer for this one, and John Wall is somewhere here. Yes, he's down the back. He's going to have a very interesting presentation. So what we're trying to do here is to think about what is the sweet spot for Max. So you've met the Max partners, you know who the organisations are, you've heard a fair bit about what's going on in southeastern Michigan, and also what's happening here and in Queensland and so on. So what is the sweet spot? How can we, in the next year or two, provide some real value through this exchange? That's what we want to get to. So we're going to give you a chance to talk about that at your tables and hopefully come up with 2 or 3 good ideas. And then we're going to be looking for a spokesperson from each table just to stand up and give us some really good ideas. So to kick this off, Jim Sayer and I, here he is, please come up. We collaborated, imagine that. We collaborated on this PowerPoint. It's here somewhere. Okay. So what we've done is to kind of kickstart this thing by thinking about, and we've taken an admittedly US-centric view of this. So what are the research questions that are being raised over there in automated vehicle, and let's call it shared mobility, just for shorthand. So nationally and among the scientific community in the US, what what are the research questions that are being looked at? And are they even relevant to Max is a question, but certainly we have great research organisations in Michigan and here. So are we going to be able to do major research projects straight off the bat? Maybe not, but there's a whole spectrum of things that we could do, as we'll try and indicate. So, Jim, so we're going to talk about what the current status is of a kind of a CAV research roadmap, what some of the candidate themes could be, narrowing the field down, and thinking about accelerated shared learning. That could be a great objective for Max. So what are the methods that we could think about, and what are the sort of outcomes that we could aspire to given who we are and what we have to work with? And then we're going to, I love to do this late in a Friday afternoon, give you a 4x4 matrix to look at for a potential straw man for Max. What sort of footprint do we think we could have? And then just to show that we did think this through a little bit, we've got a whole lot of backup slides that we're not going to show you, but are there, and anyone who wants a copy can get them. So that's what we're going to do, and Jim is going to kick this off.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, we're collaborating in real time. So there is no national, international CAV research roadmap, although the Transportation Research Board is trying to develop one. It's safe to say that AV technology is dominated by the private sector, but in the public sector and in the academic sector, AV test beds are proliferating around the world, as we've heard this week. What we've seen happen in the research community is a lot of researchers reverse engineer their research programs to take account of AV. So if I've got a research program in side entry culverts, then that becomes what do AVs mean for side entry culverts? Instead of kind of thinking about what the real questions are about automated vehicles and how they would be used and who would use them. So we don't want to get involved in too much of that. And the CV research really is at quite a mature stage, and regardless of whatever that wireless regime is, whether it's DSRC or 5G or 6G, a lot of the applications and thoughts about the business model and so on, although we haven't got a solution yet, have already been worked through. So there's a lot of that work being done. Oh, here we go. So Jim's going to represent the US research community right here.
All right, thanks, Peter. You'd almost think we had worked this out. So I want to talk about, again, very much a US-centric kind of perspective. What are the themes, the things that are coming up most frequently when we're talking primarily with industry, but also with government? First and foremost, safety. Safety, safety, safety. I don't care what you're going to do in terms of improving my congestion problem, but if it causes one injury, we're taking it out. So can't lose sight of that. Network efficiency and multimodal systems. How do we maximize kind of what we already have? There's an amazing lack of organization in a lot of cities in the United States between what are already existing modes and how you could better leverage that. And then that ultimately leads into seamless integrated mobility services. Single payment, multimodal, addressing the needs of essentially everyone, and doing so effectively. Kind of the back office of that is the mobility operating system. That's where you bring all that data together and you optimize it so that you can ultimately provide that service of being a seamless integrated mobility.
It's a very un-American idea, actually. If I may say so.
Yes, because it's not car-centric. Shared mobility, a lot of questions around shared mobility. Safety concerns is probably the one I hear most frequently. Are you going to feel comfortable getting into a vehicle with somebody you don't know, or you don't know exactly who's going to get picked up next? So it's considerate concern. Freight and delivery. I'd like to mention one instance I'm not necessarily proud of, but I had multiple deliveries to my house in the same day. Federal Express, UPS, US Postal Service, DHL, and Amazon all drove down my little rural dirt road to drop packages off at my home in the same day. That's ludicrous. No, it's just a waste of energy. Infrastructure preparation. So I haven't heard anybody mention this, but when I talk to communities, they're saying, I understand I can do something now. We can put some technology in. But what I really need to know is, because I'm redesigning this street, what do I need to have in place that's going to allow the street to be helpful, smart, part of the network of roadways in 30 years? Because that's maybe the relative frequency with which you might do a major rebuild. So simple things, some communities I know, Ann Arbor being one of them, they just automatically install extra conduit. They have known use for a particular piece of conduit, but it's a lot cheaper to add that conduit when you're already digging up the road than it is to go back and add it at a later date. Same thing with fiber. But, you might end up with a lot of dark fiber in the first place, but you know that it's there, and the incremental cost is much lower doing it the first time around. Cybersecurity goes without saying. Again, workforce, not a lot of people available, but there are a lot of people that surprisingly are actually willing to work to some degree on cybersecurity to get common standards in place. AV technology, including artificial intelligence, data science, which we have spoken quite a bit the last few days about, and then understanding transportation system impacts. So ultimately, why are we doing what we're doing? It's to have an impact. It's to improve the lives of people in our communities, and how are we demonstrating that? And last but certainly not least, energy usage and how energy usage could actually be reduced. So as Peter mentioned, we talk about the possibility of some kind of an accelerated shared learning. Please learn from my mistakes. Lord knows I've made some, and as John Wall had attested to earlier, people come and ask, how did you do that? Usually the first thing out of my mouth is, well, don't do this, because that doesn't work. Or, here are the roadblocks we ran into with industry or government or academia. So, is there an identifiable benefit in the MAX collaboration? Do we need identifiable centers of research excellence? What would be the focuses of those? Can you potentially leverage this to create economic advantages in both the Michigan and Australia? And how feasible is collaboration in the short term? The next one is very near and dear to my heart. As an academic, I'm a money sink, I'm not a money source. How do we financially support this? How do we get to the point where the doers get the chance to do. Because we can, this is very nice, particularly dinner last night, we can continue meeting like this, but at some point we need to get the people who are going to hold the spanner. I even used the right word, didn't I? They're going to hold the spanner, and yeah, or you know, the ladder up against the pole to hang the equipment. How do we get to that point? Because that doesn't happen freely, unfortunately. And which activities, you know, really are going to potentially offer the most social benefit and as well as commercial benefit. And I think if you really want to start to get the community engaged, you've got to be able to show the social benefit. If you want to get the industry engaged, you need to show the commercial benefit. Where's that balance, and can we identify areas that would really take advantage and prove benefits in both areas? Potential ways of going about this. We could write white papers together. I know that from an academic perspective, white papers don't carry a lot of weight, but if you're senior enough in the university, you're not going to get promoted anyway. So, white papers are just fine, and quite honestly, they tend to get the word out a lot quicker than journal articles. We talked about scanning tours, particularly for government and industry, reciprocal visits. I can engage in lots of conversations here over a few days, but if you really want to get the most out of learning the mistakes that I made so you don't repeat them, that's more than a couple of days. So how do you actually make that happen? It could be task force, expert groups, expert exchange. Potentially we talked about innovation clusters earlier. Is an innovation cluster around field operational tests, test bed development, laboratory and simulation, collaborative deployments and incubators. One that not on here I was thinking about is twinning. So trying to deploy similar types of technologies in both locations, although they're different enough perhaps based upon the way the roadway infrastructure is built, that we're not actually repeating work in both locations, but we're leveraging the knowledge gained from one another. So outcomes, obviously, ideally, we have to have safety. That's not an option unless you live in New Hampshire. Isn't the motto, don't tread on me?
Live free or die.
Live free or die, okay, sorry. It's a whole different population. But we in order for these technologies to be successful commercially, can we focus on acceptance, consumer acceptance? I would add to that, the actual municipality acceptance. There's a lot of fear on the part of municipal workers sometimes that they're going to lose their job because technology is coming in, and they're skeptical, particularly if there's an academic behind it. Wider availability of CV technologies and applications. Can we be sharing applications that are developed? Can we be sharing even just the bare minimum of how people responded to certain applications in Ann Arbor as opposed to, here in Ames? Policy development. Not something I personally want to be involved with, but it's important. And preparation of the infrastructure and network efficiency. So going back to that issue of how do you plan for the future? Because infrastructure owner-operators are having to think a lot more than 5 years down the road. Inclusivity. was brought up earlier several times about not just focusing on urban or suburban, but actually rural areas. In fact, there's actually quite a bit of work being sponsored by the Michigan Department of Transportation in, what is the name of that program? Michigan Mobility Initiative, looking at providing people in rural areas feasible mobility options. And then also on the equity disabled. I think, a lot of what we're seeing right now, predominantly in the development of AVs, with a few exceptions of some shuttles, they're passenger cars. They're not being designed specifically to, help somebody maybe that's confined to a wheelchair. The ingress egress issues for people who currently have them are going to continue to have them unless we start looking at other aspects of the vehicles themselves. Okay, I would never do this to you, but Peter is. So there's the 4x4, and I'll let him go through that.
Thank you. Thanks, Jim. So just to remind you, hopefully you can have discussions about methods. There's a whole lot of methods that Max could think about. So what would suit who we are and what we have, and outcomes that, from our perspective anyway, seem to have appeal both here and in Michigan. We're at different stages with AV and CV and so on, and we need to take account of these diverse locations and populations and so on. That seems to be something we want to do in both places. So there's the 4x4 matrix. So how suitable are the methods across the top? Peer review, reciprocal events, task forces and expert groups, innovation clusters, that is, in Michigan you have some test beds, you have some research programs going on, you've got incubators, you've got companies being engaged and so on, you've got the MEDC, and something similar here, and then some, because they're different environments totally, we get some collaboration between the two. And then going down the table, safety of the AV, wider availability of the CV, policy and infrastructure and efficiency stuff, and the diversity of the deployment paths seem to be outcomes that maybe Max could help with. And so we just, Jim and I just kind of thought a little bit over the phone about where those sweet spots might start to be, however we look at that. But I guess we were hoping that might help to set off your thoughts at the table level. So I think that's, just to prove, so here are all the backup slides, just so you know. I love it. So we're going to spare you those, but we'd like to, whether you use this kind of 4x4 matrix or you've already got some top of mind things that, hey, Max could really do that, and try to think about it in terms of what methods we might use and what sort of area of outcome that might be most suitable. So we're going to take probably 30 minutes in the table discussions. Scott?
I feel like it feels a bit like a classroom. So sorry about that. But the stars, so 2 stars is kind of a medium and 3 is good.
Yeah, we thought 3 stars meant maybe, for example, safety and acceptance of AV, the innovation clusters are pretty good for that. So that was sort of how we thought about it. Okay. That's our 4x4 matrix. You don't need to use it. But what we'd like you to do as tables is come up with 2 or 3 great ideas that Max could go forward with.